Okay, can you hear me now? Cool. Okay, can you hear me now? All right, just giving a couple of minutes and then we kick off. There are heaps to cover today, so hopefully we can make everything on time. Okay, we got our guest speakers also, so we are in a good hand. Hi, Jess. And we got a few other folks sitting in the background, moderating the session. And if there is any questions, as Simon mentioned in the comments in the YouTube, please raise and flag and we get back to them at the end of the first part. All right, let's start the session now. I'll remove 23rd of June. Appreciate for being us again. So it's our regular agenda as usual. So we talk about some upcoming events, and we have for the first part covering some of the highlights from the Microsoft Build 2021, which was one of the major events happened recently, plus few other things in between. And then we have the main session with Jesse Loudon from talking us through all about the Azure Policy. And in a great coincidence, both of us are from Lab 3, one of the fastest growing practices in Australia, and partner award for Microsoft in 2020, and gold partner in most of the competencies, which is good. Okay, some upcoming events similar to previous months. Microsoft Reactor Series are running a couple of events and schedule different type of events from the technical, from soft skills and different skills you may need in your career, and through their channel at Microsoft Reactor Series. You can go and check them out in their Meetup page, and please attend if you find any of them as of your interest. Cloud Skills Hub also, it's still available and accessible to all. Basically, it's a unified center for free cloud trainings, which is tailored to all of the levels and learning across all the technologies from Microsoft, offering from Office 365, security, Microsoft Azure, and Power Apps, Power Platform. So there are different things available, free webinars, online course, and everything which you can use to upskill yourself in any of the technology stacks which you find it more fit to your career, or if you are interested to upskill in new area. And it's also good if you are planning for Microsoft certifications, and you can find all the learning paths and everything, all the modules in that space which you can use. Quickly talking about the Azure Lifecycle, service lifecycle. So if for anyone who doesn't know the Azure services lifecycle, going to quickly on this one. So that's a general lifecycle of all pretty much every single service comes to the Azure Cloud Platform. Normally, it start with the private preview. In the private preview, basically is the intention is to introduce the service normally through the private channels, and normally the engineering teams require some sign up which you need to be aware of, for example, through partner channels or any other channels available to partners, which you can sign up and then start working with the engineering teams to form the initial shape of the service, which going to come to the live sooner after the private preview. After definitely you don't get any SLA and you don't get any support, and the full intention is basically to work with the engineering team to form and shape the initial form of the service. And then it goes to the public preview. In the public preview, normally it makes it available in general in the most of Azure data centers to all of the public Azure users, but you don't get any SLA. It's not normally recommended for production use, and you don't get any support. And still, the intention is to enhance the service and contribute to forming the service to make it more suitable for all the Azure users. And after a period of public preview, which sometimes it can be from 1 month to 6 months, it goes to GA typically. And when it goes to GA, you get the full support from Microsoft Teams, and you get the full SLA on that service. And time to time, Microsoft announced the deprecation announcements for a couple of services. You get a reasonable amount of notice on those services if you are using in any of your subscriptions, and sometimes with recommended approach in terms of migrating, or if you are required to port it to other services, or with any possible solution around that. And after that, which is normally with a minimum of 12 months, and then service get retired and completely unavailable from the Azure Cloud Platform. For the what's new in Azure, we're going to mostly focus on the announcement from the build, and apart from that, a few weeks before or a few weeks after that, the MS build, it's been quiet because before that, Microsoft holds everything to be for announcement during the build conference, which was virtual, and I hope everyone could attend. And after that, being quiet also. But the one private preview service is up now, which requires you to sign up through a form if you are interested to participate, as we mentioned in the life cycle, and to work directly with the engineering team and provide feedback. And it's around the Cosmos DB partial document updates. Basically, it's a new feature in the Cosmos DB, which you can perform path level update on a single document to update a specific properties or a specific fields, and it doesn't need, and the benefit is it doesn't need you a full document replace operation from the client side, and you don't need to fully read the whole document for updating a specific field or properties. It's very useful in lowering the latency and significantly reduce the network payload, and it has a many benefit for developers also in terms of productivity and flexibility by allowing conditional partial document updates based on the predicate filters. It's only supported for core API in SQL APIs at the moment in the private preview via .NET SDK and also via Java SDKs. So all other APIs are not available in this private preview. Stored procedures are also supported. And please reach out if you would like and you are interested to sign up, and we can send you the form address which you can fill in and get in touch with the engineering team to participate in this private preview cycle. Couple of public preview The first one, which was announced during the build, is Azure App Service Arc enabled. So the family of the Azure App Service, which includes all the services mentioned below, like the Functions app, Logic apps, App Service itself, API management, and Event Grid, which Microsoft recently categorized them all in under App Service family. Now you can run them on Kubernetes AKS cluster or anywhere else on your own Kubernetes cluster, which is connected through Azure Arc, and basically if they are Azure Arc enabled. And you can still benefit from all the features of the app service and all the features of all other services, which you still get publicly on the Azure normal service. Like a deployment slot, CI/CD with the GitHub Actions and everything else. This feature is now available for many of the application services families and in many of the regions also, if you would like to participate, and you can go and start provisioning and test it. Azure API Management WebSocket API support is in public preview now. So with this feature, basically similar to the REST and SOAP APIs, which you can host them in API management, now you can host the WebSocket API. So if you are developing WebSocket APIs on the backend service and host it somewhere, now you can expose them and bring them into API management as a unified place, similar to REST and SOAP APIs, and you can get the full features of the API management on the WebSocket APIs as well. Another interesting one is Azure Functions with the managed identity support for a couple of new Azure bindings and triggers. As a recent changes in this preview, Azure Functions offers a new set of extensions still in the preview for several triggers and bindings, such as like Azure Blob, Azure Queues, Azure Event Hub, Azure Service Bus, and Azure Event Grid. Which is basically built based on the latest Azure SDKs. And one of the feature enablement of this is you can leverage using the managed identity for this new binding and triggers, which are in preview. And by that means you can connect to these services via managed identity rather than the connection string, which is more secure way, and also reduce the management for you in terms of secret management in your app configuration. Durable functions, it's personally my top pick from the build announcement. It's got the two new storage providers. By default, Azure Durable Function use the Azure Storage as the backend storage provider, and by default works with that one. Now, with this new announcement, Microsoft added two new additional storage providers in the public preview and ready to use. One is Netherread, and the other one is Microsoft SQL Server. Netherread storage provider is a project from Microsoft Research, and basically it's powered by Azure Event Hub and Azure Page Blobs, and it uses another different database technology, which is again is from Microsoft research teams, called Faster. And by this, it's basically designed for significantly higher throughput and rather than the storage, the default Azure storage, and it's more cost effective also if you have a very high throughput workload with your Azure Durable Functions, which you can replace your Azure storage provider with this one. The other one, which is the SQL Server support as a storage provider for your Durable Functions, and that means you can take your Durable Functions anywhere that Microsoft SQL Server is supported. It can be Azure SQL Server, it can be managed services, or it can be even if you host the SQL Server container on the Kubernetes in the Arc-enabled scenarios. The biggest advantage of this storage provider is you can benefit from the business continuity and disaster recovery for your Durable Functions rather than the storage accounts, which is a great feature, especially in the enterprises or for businesses who need to plan for business continuity. Another public preview is Azure SQL Database Ledger. And basically, it's all about adding tamper-evident capabilities to your Azure SQL database via cryptographic verification for your centralized data stores. And basically, it means adding the blockchain capability and benefit of the blockchain to your fully managed Azure SQL environment or to your managed SQL instances. So that's another benefit of this service, which there are specific business cases around that. If you refer to the documentation, there are good examples. It describes the business case and use cases. Another public preview announcement is around, again, Azure Cosmos DB with 3 different features enabled: always encrypted, Linux emulator, and integrated cache, which are again interesting. Always encrypted means now with using the SDK, Azure Cosmos SDK, you can do the encryption and you can encrypt the sensitive data at the client application side before sending to the Azure Cosmos DB account, and basically get them stored in the DB. So you encrypt it before get them stored in the DB, and that the benefit is you don't need to reveal the encryption key to the database, and database doesn't know anything about the encryption of your sensitive data. Another one is the Linux emulator, similar to the existing Windows emulator, which is available for Cosmos DB. You can use this one on your macOS or Linux systems for local development if you are developing application which require Cosmos DB. The limitation is only supported for the core and SQL APIs, and all other APIs might be added during the preview or maybe when it's gone to the GA. Integrated cache is another interesting feature added to the Cosmos DB, and basically it's a new in-memory cache built into the Cosmos DB service to optimize read operations, and which brings cost efficiency and latency. Similar to the previous emulator, it's only available for the core and SQL APIs also. Azure Security Center and GitHub Actions integration. This feature allows integrating your Azure Security Center with GitHub Actions, which is interesting because it enables you to easily incorporate security and compliance into the software development lifecycle. For example, operations teams and IT teams can get the visibility into your CI/CD pipeline or any security risk or anything if it raised, or if you build through via the GitHub Actions. Or another scenario could be you can benefit from the registry scanning features available in the Azure Security Center and integrate that one into your GitHub Actions without any extra configuration, and you just use it. Visual Studio 2022 Preview 1 is released, and it's a new generation of the Visual Studio, which is completely built on 64-bit platform. And the purpose of it's ready. If you want, you can go download the Preview 1, start using, and provide feedback to the team also. But the main purpose of this release basically is for stability and scalability of the 64-bit platform. But you still get lots of new features and enhancements introduced in this new version, which you can start use and use them in developing modern applications also. Any questions on the private preview, please let us know. I'll move on to the GA, and then we get back to the questions after that. Azure free tier updates. Azure free tier updates basically got a few services included in the free tier, which you can start using if you go and sign up for Azure free account. As you can see, Cosmos DB, Azure Database for Postgres, Azure Database for MySQL, Azure Key Vault, Azure Logic Apps, and Azure Media, the encoding part of the Azure Media services are included in the Azure free tier. That means you can start using these services as a free to start building application and exploring those services to see if they are suitable for the application you are building and you're going to onboard on Microsoft Azure, which is a great feature and extra bonus from Azure platform also. Microsoft built, as we announced, I think it was last month or maybe in April, has built a OpenJDK, and which is now in GA. And basically, it's a completely new distribution of OpenJDK built and supported by Microsoft, which you can use it everywhere. It's based on Java 11 and OpenJDK version 11. And JDK version 16 also added for the 64-bit server support and desktop environment, both on Mac, Linux, and Windows. So you can start using this one in any of the services or in any of the services, or for example, Java services, if you are bringing to the Azure. But it's not specifically for Azure. You can use this OpenJDK for your Java application, but take it to anywhere else. Azure Durable Functions PowerShell support is finally here. So after a few years, they added the PowerShell support to the durable function. That means now you can use PowerShell version 7 to create and run stateful workflows using durable functions, which is a great feature added to the durable functions. Azure Map got two new GAs. Maps Creator got GA also. Maps Creator is part of the Azure Map service, and basically it gives you plenty of features and gives specifically to developers to building applications with map features based on the indoor map data, and some other key features like convert the floor plans to the map data and use them in the service. It was in preview, and after almost 6 months, or maybe more than 6 months, it's now GA, ready to use in production. Another one is the Elevation API. Elevation API is basically designed to make it easy for developers to build various scenarios which they need the elevation data, and basically for any given point on the earth, it calculates the elevation for you, and you can access to this data using this API from the Azure Map. And basically it's a fully managed service which you can use, and basically you get that measurement from the mean sea level also. That this service is GA, and it's also available for use in production with full support. Some other GA announcement, most of them included in MS Build. Logic App Standard tier is GA now, and basically it's a new single tenant offering from Logic App team, which now runs on a containerized runtime, which is the same runtime that Azure Functions, new Azure Functions runtimes built on top of that, and provides many flexibility, like you can, similar to the first announcement in the preview, you can take it to anywhere, like a Kubernetes or Arc-enabled Kubernetes. And basically it simplifies the deployment, CI/CD pipeline. You can get the GitHub CI/CD for the Azure Functions similarly. And another big benefit is, because it's running on the Azure Functions runtime, existing one, you can benefit from the enterprise features like integrating with the virtual network, or using the private endpoint for integrating with your virtual network to have the workload completely private in your own network. And another feature which is included in this standard tier and single tenant offering is you can start building and managing the stateless workflows. So far, Logic apps are stateful because they use a storage to persist the data for action execution, and at any time they can continue. But now with this new standard SQ, you can start developing stateless workflows, which are much faster to run, and because there is no dependency to any storage and any persisting data. App Service Managed Certificates, which is in preview for quite a long time, is now GA, and basically that means Azure Static Web Apps. Static Web Apps is also announced as a GA during the build, and as you probably know, it's a fully managed service for hosting modern web applications or single web apps. With the modern if built with the modern frameworks, and Azure also provides you the capability for using the serverless APIs, along with heaps of great features to simplify the whole workflow from the code to cloud, similar to CI/CD and everything else, and basically boosting the developer productivity for releasing modern web applications and hosting them in the Azure Static Web Apps. Azure App Service Managed Certificates, it's gone GA after quite a long time, and basically it's a managed offering from App Service family or App Service itself, for which manage the certificate lifecycle of the app service and your custom domain, and securing your custom domain for you for free, and it's available for all the app services, Linux and Windows, and you don't pay any extra money on top of the app service itself for this feature, which is another great bonus from Azure platform to securing your custom domain and securing your application in general. Visual Studio Code Python support is GA now in Visual Studio Code, and by that it means the team announced the PyLance for Python language and extension in the Visual Studio Code. And basically, PyLance is a new server environment for Python language, which comes with significant improvements in performance, significant improvement in the IntelliSense, and other new features that Python developers would benefit from using this extension in Visual Studio Code. Cosmos DB serverless tier also is GA, so it announced during the build last year, but this year they announced it in GA, and basically it's a new consumption-based model in the Cosmos DB, which doesn't require you to purchase and calculate your request unit in advance, and you can basically let your containers run cost effectively in the Azure Cosmos DB account and database, with no minimum monthly cost, because it's completely consumption based, and it doesn't need any provisioning of throughput in advance, as I mentioned earlier. So but it's not suitable for any type of workload. It's mostly recommended for workloads that are very spiky and often idle traffic. So if you are building those kind of application or serverless API, you might benefit from this Cosmos DB serverless tier. Azure API Management also got two new interesting features in GA. The first one is open source portal, similar to I think it was May or April, that the open source portal or open API portal was announced in preview, but now it's immediately gone to GA. API portal is open source portal that let you create and publish a customized API website with the full documentation, fully for free, and you can host it on the GitHub also. You can use the GitHub for building actions and hosting, and take advantage of all the GitHub workflow and automation. And at the back, it takes it leverages the same key technologies that API management is now using for the built-in API developer portal. But now they announced it as a separate component, completely free for use. Premium tier prices got an interesting update in terms of the price reduction. If you purchase subsequent units after the first unit, you are eligible to get for 50% off on subsequent purchase units. So that means similar to the existing offering, for the first unit, you still pay the same amount. But for the second and all the subsequent units, if you purchase for the API management in the premium tier, you get 50% off on that on those purchases. And so that means if you want to scale your API management for higher throughput APIs, and it makes it very cost effective, and it's basically another push to use in premium features such as availability zone supports or multi-region feature, which is available only in API management premium. So these were basically our pick from the announcement so far, mainly from the Microsoft build. Going through some couple of useful links as usual. So the new Breakpoint, which is a new webcast and videocast running by Microsoft Australia team. Simons is here now if you have any questions. And basically, it's a very short episodic webcast, runs every Thursday on 11 o'clock Sydney time. And basically, it's a good show to give you some view on what's happening and what's existing in Microsoft Azure or any other interesting work by Microsoft guys or any other community works is happening. So you can get a view on that one. Another one is the monthly community newsletter, which is a curated content, again, by Microsoft Australia and Simon's team, which you can receive it monthly. It's a short newsletter with useful links from the community. It includes all the upcoming events and useful links in the trainings also. So please subscribe and start using that one every month. Another one we would like to promote here is probably you notice already that we created a LinkedIn page for our community, Azure Sydney user group. Please go and subscribe to our page. So we are trying to promote our community to the LinkedIn platform also. And when we reach a specific number of followers, then we can use this platform for the live events and basically taking our live events or online events into this platform also. That would be a really great help for us, and we really appreciate that one. And similar to other months, if you need any free Azure Pass or if you know anyone that needs to get hands-on on the Azure platform, please hang around until the end of the session, and then we can facilitate that for you to give you some Azure Pass, which you can use it for free and with majority of the Azure services. That's it for the first part. So I'm almost 4 or 5 minutes over. Let's take a short break. If there is any question, we are more than happy to get back to the question and answer them or raise them, and we can repeat it here and answer. Otherwise, after a couple of minutes short break, we'll have Jess from Lab 3 for the main session, which is completely focusing on Azure Policy. And Jesse is been working with the Azure Policy, and it's quite championing in this space, I would say. So there are lots of great tips coming out from Azure from this main session by Jess, and many key takeaways. Thank you. Sorry, myself was on mute. You are on mute also, Jess?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes?
Awesome.
Good to see you, mate. Over to
Yeah.
you. Thanks.
Are we starting now?
Yep, let's kick off.
Yeah, great. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome, Azure Sydney User Group. This is amazing to be here tonight, talking about Azure Policy and Policy as Code. Sorry to keep you waiting, and hopefully wherever you are safe and warm. And let me kick off my screen share. I do have some slides. Okay, so this session is about Azure Policy, as you should probably know. My name is Jesse Loudon. I'm a principal consultant in Azure and DevOps for Lab 3. I'm in Sydney, Australia. And tonight, we're also joined by the open source mascot from Microsoft. His name's Brady, who you can see there in the bottom right. So Brady's got this this kind of mission tonight. He's joining us to try and make it to the terminal that you can see at the top there, and he's going to follow along with us on our mission. So let's dive straight into this. So this session is really, what's happening in the Azure Policy today, but also what have I learned from using Azure Policy for the past 12 months. In putting together these slides, I had this, view of some people may not know Azure Policy very much. Some of you may also be working in it today already, be very familiar with it. So I'm trying to start off with an introduction here of the kind of bird's eye view of this is everything you would probably work with if you're working with Azure Policy, and this is what you are kind of up for as well if you're looking to get into Azure Policy as code and look to add value to your own organization or your own customers wherever you are coming from. So the ecosystem here that I've kind of shown is comprising of a different number of entities here. So you've got different documents, different code sources, toolings like Azure DevOps, the VS Code extension, which I hope to show you a bit later if we have time. Languages here, very important. So I kind of started in my journey with Azure Policy. I started with PowerShell to create and manage, delete the policy resources. I ran into some roadblocks. I'm not very good with PowerShell, to be honest. I then migrated over to HashiCorp, Terraform, and now I'm using Bicep as well as HashiCorp. So if you look at the demo later tonight and any of the code that I'm sharing, you'll see that kind of progression that I've made in my own sort of knowledge and experimenting, if you want to call that, with Azure Policy. So JSON, of course, is really the primary language, I would say, that you need to be familiar with if you're working with Azure Policy, because it's like that machine language that the Azure Resource Manager uses for everything. So as you'll find out later on, Bicep abstracts a number of this, several of this JSON language for us to make our policy development easier. But we still need to get into the JSON for several of the policy resources, like particularly with definitions that you'll see later. At the bottom there's a special mention to azadvertiser.net. This is a super useful community-made portal. So it shows you all the recent policy definitions, policy aliases, policy sets. Basically, it's somehow hooked into the API of all these changes, and that's a single portal you can go to see all the possible resources and aliases that you can work with Azure Policy. So you can see there's some statistics here on the screen on your right. There's over 1,000 generally available policy definitions, and there's over 38,000 policy aliases today. So that's a gigantic number, and there's a huge gap there in terms of policy definitions that have been created by Microsoft and by the community for those policy aliases. So I see a huge opportunity there if you're looking to add value in your organization or looking to develop policies yourself. So let's kick on. Just quick kind of overview of use cases. You probably are aware of most of these already. It's important, I think, to call them out. This is not all the use cases, but most of the common ones I've seen are tagging, monitoring, network, of course. As you saw on the last slide, we've got over 17,000 policy aliases just for the network side of things. Regulatory compliance is important. If you need your organization or your customer to align to those, you can use Azure Policy for those. Data protection and it's kind of general use cases for constraining and governing your SKUs and locations and stuff. So yeah, again, this is only like a small sort of snapshot of what you can do with Azure Policy. I think there are so many undiscovered kind of use cases that are yet to be really tested out and surfaced just based on the sheer number of policy aliases that are existing today and what's coming as well. I see Microsoft constantly adding new policy aliases as new resource providers are getting on board with the policy story as well. So let's cover effects and order of evaluation. Apologies if this is hard to follow. I've never seen a diagram like this, and I had to come up with something to kind of show you what is going on when a policy is evaluating, and different types of effects will be evaluated first. So what we have here is on the left-hand side, if I just zoom in here, typically you'll get some put and get requests coming into the Azure Resource Manager, sent to maybe some resource providers there. So maybe you're creating a virtual network or a load balancer. So that put and get request would obviously be going to that resource provider for the relevant resource. Now, the Azure Resource Manager, when it receives that request from wherever it's coming from, it could be coming from the portal, might be coming from some SDK or API. It needs to do an evaluation. So the first effects that are being evaluated are happening during the create and update request that the Azure Resource Manager handles. So bear with me, this is not going to take too long, I hope, but basically the first effects to be evaluated in terms of order are the disabled, and then there's modify, append, deny, audit. If any of those pass or they're not relevant, the Azure Resource Manager then does the audit if not exists effect. It evaluates after the resource is created, and then if there is a deploy if not exist effect in your policy definition, it will do that after about 10 to 15 minutes delay. And then there's patch requests that can come in as well. So let's say you're updating a resource tag key or value. That's an example of a patch request, and that typically goes up to here. So it actually evaluates during the create and update request. So that hopefully that's not too confusing to understand. And if you want to look at this more, I recommend going to this link shown below. It's the documents for Azure Policy. It has a really advanced explanation of this, but not in a diagram. So yeah, I tried to create it in a diagram for you. So let's cover compliance and remediation quickly. This is again a super interesting diagram. I wouldn't say it's my best, but what's happening here is we have a new policy assignment that gets created, and when you create that, you need to set the assignment scope. So in this example, the scope is the subscription of the environment, and in the subscription there's existing resources created prior to the policy assignment, and there's new or updated resources created since the policy assignment. So what I'm trying to show you in this diagram is that when you're managing policy assignments for your customer or for your company, just be aware of the state of resources. There's going to be existing and there's going to be new resources. And the existing resources will need a policy remediation task that you can see up here. That task can be triggered by API through code, or it can be done manually through the portal. And that happens after there's a compliance check which runs against the policy assignment scope that you've set in your deployment. So the compliance check is automatic. It happens kind of on a schedule in the back end of Azure. I think it's like every 24 hours or when a new policy assignment is created. You can also trigger your own compliance check through code, which I can show you in a demo a bit later today. So let's get on to some tips here. I have a tip for custom policies here, and the reason I want to show you this is because sometimes I see, looking at different policies in different repositories, even in the community and internally as well in where I work, sometimes I see custom policies have the wrong mode set up. So here you'll see the mode is set to all. There's another mode type which is called indexed. So typically the recommendation from Microsoft is, unless your policy is managing tags, with the exception of tags on resource groups, you should set your mode for your custom policy to all. So you'll see a bit later in the demo, I've got some policies which use the index mode. Those are only for managing tags, with the exception of resource groups, of course. Now, the other thing I've highlighted in this snippet is the metadata source and version. I really believe in code being self-documenting, but also this is a little tip for you. You can include this source and version metadata in your code as you deploy policies to your environments, and you can document things like the source repository here. So here I've got an example where I've documented where my code is actually coming from. So global BAL, Azure Policy as code, and the semantic version here is 0.1.0. This metadata is not required at all by Microsoft. It's something that you are free to use however you want, right? So I think there's some tips here and some value that you can gain from looking into that. In actual bicep code, so this is an example of that same thing. So this is a resource for a policy definition, and this is what it would look like. So this is where I've set the mode to all, and the source I've set to a parameter value there in the bicep file. Managed identity permissions. If you've worked with Azure Policy, you probably have come across this one. So certain policies with deploy if not exist and modify effects, they need a managed identity to be able to enforce those effects and to actually make the change on the resource that's non-compliant. So on the left here, you can see this is a policy assignment that I've just taken a screenshot of. It actually doesn't have any permissions. That's why I've got that red sort of warning there. So what that means is when a non-compliant resource is found, it doesn't have permissions to be able to go and enforce the compliance, whatever that compliance action is. It might be updating the resource to include a value or a property, or deploying something as part of an ARM template in deploy if not exists. So on the right is what it should look like. So definitely you can go check that out. You can query your policy assignments through API or SDK, or just have a look at them through the portal if you have access. And on the next screen, so here's what you can do. What I recommend as a solution, because when you create a policy assignment, it doesn't create the role assignment automatically, which would give the managed identity access to do what it needs to do, as I discussed. So what you can do as code is you can create a policy, you can create a role assignment shown here in this snippet, and you can set the principal ID of that role assignment to your policy assignment in your code. So here, that's the one I've highlighted here. I've got a monitoring governance assignment in the same repository, and I'm bringing that in as a value using bicep syntax. So that means as code, when I'm creating my policy assignment, the role assignment is also created, which means that managed identity as part of the policy assignment will have the right permissions from the very beginning. And if I ever delete this role assignment or the policy assignment, it will also delete those resources. So it's a nice, clean experience, which I like. Okay, this is a nice one. It's not too well known, I think, but it has come in maybe in the last 6 months as a feature and as a possible property. Custom deny messages you can implement to your policy assignments. So in the bottom left, I'm showing you a example of a custom deny message that I've put in as code in the top right. And this is the experience of what someone may see like a user in your environment for when they're trying to do something in the portal and that's being denied by your policy, right? So if you didn't have this, they'd have to interpret the JSON of the policy, and maybe they don't have access, maybe they're not across or familiar with what policy is doing. That's a lot of troubleshooting, and it's a lot of back and forth with different support teams. They might have to log a support ticket. This is one way you can leverage custom deny messages in your policy assignments to really speed up the compliance actions on your users, so they know pretty much exactly, oh, this is what I need to do. So in this case, there's a resource group that's missing the owner tag, and I've said in text here in the message, you need to include the owner tag in your resource. That's a clear action on the user of what's missing, right? So definitely look into that if you're not using that already. Let's cover deploy if not exist effect. One of my favorite effects that are possible today in Azure Policy is the deploy if not exist effect. And the reason for that is because it's like a nested ARM template, if you've ever worked with them. But instead of a nested ARM template, it's an ARM template that's nested in the policy. So we're leveraging the power of Azure Policy and the if compliance checks that are possible to deploy an ARM template for non-compliant resources. So this is something that has been existing in Azure Policy for some time. There's already built-in policies that use this effect. I think there's a lot of examples of this if you want to go and dig into some code. And it's really useful. I'll show you a bit later on as well. For example, I've got metric alerts being deployed to non-compliant load balancers that are missing a metric alert. So here, that's one example where if someone deploys a load balancer in my environment and it doesn't include a metric alert, this is a way I can enforce monitoring governance rather than just denying that deployment. It actually goes and auto configures the resource after it's deployed with a metric alert using this ARM template. So yeah, really, really cool. It's useful to discuss RBAC permissions. Useful in a way because, if you're working in a large organization or your customer has a lot of different Azure environments, you should be using service principals, and your users may also be coming from different kind of groups. So you might not have everyone as a policy developer. There may only be some policy readers there. They won't need as much permission to look at policies compared to your policy users, for instance, who might need to run remediation. So this is it's a table of a design of different permissions and the scope at which you would assign those permissions. Definitely, it's not applicable to every single organization. You can certainly have a more stringent RBAC permission design than this, but this is kind of like a skeleton of a design that may be commonly used. And the reason so you may have noticed the service principals identity has user access administrator as well as resource policy contributor. The reason I have user access administrator, I just want to call this out, is because of role assignments for policy assignments. So before I showed you the policy assignments that are missing the appropriate permissions for the managed identity. So for the service principal to be able to create a role assignment to the appropriate scope, it needs this built-in role called user access administrator to be able to do that, or you need a custom role with the appropriate permission to create the role assignment. Hope that makes sense. Now let's look at code deployment. This is a multi-tenant model. So typically you'll have a single repository. I would hope you have a single repository for managing your policies. This is shown here in the source control here box. Now, typically you would do your work in a feature branch, set up a pull request. As part of that pull request, you could have a non-prod stage deploying to a non-prod tenant. Now you can scope your policy assignments to different scopes here. So you've got management group, subscription, resource group. You can I recommend you create your policy definitions, so policy sets, initiatives, and definitions at the highest scope possible, so they are reusable within other management groups or other subscriptions. That kind of reduces the amount of coding you have to do from your policy repo. But definitely for the assignments, you want to think about which scope is appropriate. Do you want to assign your policy to the management group, or you want to assign it to a resource group initially for testing and development? So once that pull request has been completed, you've done your kind of CI job there, integration testing, you then merge it into main. It goes through a prod stage and gets deployed to your production tenant like that. Now, the next slide here is of a single tenant model, very similar, but concept is there. So in a single tenant model, you should probably have a dedicated management group or dedicated subscription for policy testing. The reason for that is because policies, they can have various effects, and it's good to test them. It's good to test them at the highest possible level. Now, you can deploy your policies and assign the scope to say a management group in your production, and then set your policy assignment enforcement mode to not enforced, and that way you can see some audits going on without actually making any actions or taking any actions on newer and updated resources. But I think what I've learned from my experience is having like a dedicated management group with a subscription in there, that you can actually just freely test policies and resources being created in that environment. That provides the least amount of friction for going to prod, I feel. And when you go to prod as well, you'll have probably some change requests to go through, and some valid post-production deployment validation testing as well. All right, how are we doing for time? Yeah, not bad. So we're up to the coding demo. I have a repository containing the code if you are watching this in the future. This repository is something that I've kind of merged into from other repositories that I've managed over time in the last 12 months. So it is kind of like a super repository, if you want to call it that. It contains code for Bicep and Terraform. And what we're going to be looking at today are some different concepts for policy as code. So you can see here I've got modules, resource types, scope options, resource properties, resource snippets, which are really cool for policy work, and some CI/CD workflows there. So let me exit out of that. So I'm in my terminal here. I might zoom in a bit. There we go. Bicep, so version am I running? That may be a question you have in the future. I'll run AZ Bicep version to verify. Okay, so I'm on CLI version 0.4.63. This is included as part of AZ CLI. So one of the main tools you'll be working with if you choose to use policy as code with Bicep is Azure CLI, which includes Bicep there. So here I have my repository that I mentioned, and I'm in the Bicep folder. I'm in my modules folder. I've got different modules for every single resource type. You don't have to do this. I have experimented with this because I found that for large-scale deployments, if you don't separate your resource types into different folders and different modules, you can end up with a very large folder containing everything, and then it's a little bit difficult to manage and traverse and digest what's going on. It is a bit more work to do this. I can definitely tell you that from experience. The reason for that is because once you start using modules like this, you need to be able to pass through and pass in different values like resource IDs, parameters between modules. So I'll show you a bit of that. So here, main.bicep is the file that I'll be working with. Bicepconfig.json is a file I've created recently because I was running into some bicep linting errors, and I'll show you why I'm using that as well. So all my assignments are in the assignments folder. Definitions are in the definitions, initiatives, etc. So let's take a look at my main file first. So in this example code, I am targeting the subscription. This is generally the first line that I have. Now, if you look at my code, this is not the only way to do it, but I like to put parameters at the very top of my bicep files, as well as outputs, and then I have my resources towards the bottom. I don't know why I do this. I just find it helps me to read and make changes as I manage the bicep file and as I manage the modules. So in this bicep file, these are all my parameters that I'm setting defaults for. So I'm not having to pass in defaults for these parameters or any values. The defaults are set from this main file. Now, if I collapse everything here, you can see I've got different resource modules. So I got a module here for resource groups, action groups, definitions, initiatives, assignments, and exemptions, which are a really cool resource that is fairly, I feel like fairly new to Azure Policy. So if we look at each of these modules, generally you'll find a single bicep file within them. The exception for that is going to be the definitions. So here you can see I've got a bicep file for each custom definition that I am delivering as code, right, to my environment. You may also notice I have a single definitions file, which is actually it's like a module file for the entire definitions folder. So this is a way I found that I could create separate bicep files for my definitions and then bring them all into a single file to make that easier to manage from a higher level. So each definition is brought in as a different module call here, and I'm sure there's better ways to do this, but basically, so if you see here, this module is called policy 0, and it references a specific custom definition in my folder, and it's bringing in some parameters there, which I set from a higher level. So let's look at so that's some definitions there. I've got exemptions. Here's an exemption example. I won't dive into this just yet because I'll leave this to the end of the demo. Initiatives. So if you don't know Azure Policy very well, initiatives are a way of grouping common policies together. So in this example as code, I've got all my monitoring policies, all my custom monitoring policies grouped into this initiative so that when I then go to assign it, I don't need to create a new assignment for every single custom policy. I just assign the initiative. So this is like the recommended pattern from Microsoft. If you today you don't have very much initiatives and you have a lot of different assignments going on, I would definitely recommend you look to consolidate those assignments into maybe as few as possible and use initiatives for your common policies. It's going to make your life a lot easier, I feel. So this initiative uses a for each statement to create the policy definitions. So it's looking at an array parameter that I'm bringing in from the top of the file, and then it's setting some parameter values here just based on that array value. So it's something here as well that you may notice that you may not have seen is this policy definition reference ID, which I'm setting to the policy name. I use this quite frequently when I'm doing policy assignment custom deny messages and when I'm doing policy exemption as well, because if you don't actually set this reference ID, what you'll get in your policy after you create it, your custom policy, is you'll actually see like I think it's like a 15 line string. It's not 15 line, but 15 character string, auto-generated. It's completely random. I have no idea how to remember that string, so I like to set this reference ID for each custom policy to the actual name. That way, if I need to use that in a custom deny message or a policy exemption, I can just pass in the name for that policy in this policy initiative. So I've got one initiative here for monitoring governance and one for tag governance. Let's look at assignments quickly. How are we doing for time? Yeah, we're right. So in assignments here, I've got 2 assignments, one for each initiative. And I also have the role assignment for each initiative as well. So this is what I discussed about the managed identity that's created by the assignment. So when you have an assignment for an initiative that contains effects such as modify or deploy if not exists, you need to pass in this identity block that you can see here. Let's zoom in. And you need to set the type to system assigned. And now, I don't know of any other way to do this. I have heard some feedback from the community that a lot of people and organizations love to pass in their own user managed identity. That way you don't have to use a system assigned one. Maybe you would pre-create the managed identity in advance and then pass in the ID of that managed identity to your policy assignment. That is not possible today, but I'm hoping it's coming later this year or in the next year. So right now, system assigned is pretty much the only option if you're using those policy effects. And what this does is it creates a managed identity at the same time as the resource is created. And then what we'll do for the role assignment is we will reference that managed identity ID as the principal ID, and we'll pass in a role definition ID. So in this case, it's this string here is a RBAC role for contributor, which is typically a permission that might be needed by a deploy if not exists or modify effect. Okay. Enforcement mode here is a good one to know as well. If you're looking to mitigate risk when you're deploying policy assignments to production, you can set this enforcement mode to do not enforce. By default, it is enforced, just so you know. So that means if it is enforced, that means when the policy assignment is created in your scope, whether that's subscription management group, the policy effects will take immediate effect on any new or updated resources. Existing resources, after they are scanned by the policy compliance checker engine, they will have to have a remediation task kicked off either manually or through code to get remediated. Okay, so that's a good one to know. Let me expand this here and show you the custom deny messages. So you've seen a bit of this before in the slides. So let me just walk you through this. I'll turn on word wrap and zoom in. So this is super, super useful for setting deny messages for your policies that would be denying a non-compliant resource in your environment. Now this block at the top, this is a deny message that applies to all policies in the assignment. So that's something you can set as like a generic kind of general, as you can see here. I'm just set it to say something's missing a mandatory tag. The second block below it, this is a specifically targeted deny message because it uses this policy definition reference ID. This is how you can set a deny message and target a certain policy in your assignment. And here you can see I've set it to the actual name, and I'm bringing in a parameter for the mandatory tag key, which I'm setting from a higher level from my main.bicep file, right? So if I didn't do this, if I didn't, going back a few minutes, if I didn't set the policy definition reference ID when I created the policy initiative, and it was some, random string of auto-generated numbers, I would have to remember what those numbers are, go and look them up, or somehow reference them through Bicep. And here I've just included the name of the policy, because that's what I used as the policy definition reference ID. So that's how custom deny messages work. I will demo that to you right now, actually. So this code's been deployed. Of course, I've deployed it in advance. Come on. And what I'm going to do, so that custom deny message is active. So in my environment, I have these assignments. And I'll go to the tag governance assignment. And I'll look at this non-compliance message here. So you can see, just as I had in the code, this is the default generic non-compliance message applies to everything in this assignment. And here's my targeted non-compliance message where I've targeted that specific reference ID that I've set, right, for requiring a tag to resource group, the owner tag specifically. And if I look at the message, you can see this is the message I defined as code just here. So what does this actually look like? So when I go and create a resource group, test any name. I won't set a tag. There's the error as I would expect. So error type, it was disallowed by policy, and the raw error here, whoops, here's the custom deny message that you can see. And as I said before, if someone didn't know policy, they didn't have access to policy, they've never seen it before, and they're looking at this raw error. If you didn't have this message, they would probably have to go digging around through this JSON to find out, okay, what's the assignment ID? What's the policy definition name? Where can I find out, what's this policy actually looking for? So yeah, use custom deny messages where you can, definitely. I think it's a really good thing. If I then go back and I add the owner tag to this resource, HBO intern, let's see if I can create that. Yeah, all right, that went through. Awesome. Now that's the portal view. Let me show you what it looks like in the CLI view if you were going to be seeing that deny message through CLI. So in my code here, I'm deploying a resource group. And what I'll do is I'll comment out the tags that are being passed in to that resource group. And I will run a deployment. So this is a subscription level deployment. I'm using the confirm with what if statement. Can I paste this? Let's see what kind of error I get from doing this change in my code. You'll notice I get a linting error here. That's this yellow text response there. That's because I'm not using this parameter anymore in my Bicep file, because I've commented out the tag value that uses that parameter, so the linter has picked that up. Okay, so in the what if statement, it says, okay, you are making this change to the resource group, you're removing the tags. And I'll say, yep, go and execute that. All right, that's running. So if you get linting errors like this, you can actually override them if you didn't know that. That's why I have this bicep config.json file here, because what I found is in my deploy if not exist policies, I'm using management.azure.com as one of the host namespaces that's needed in the ARM template. So I've actually needed to comment out this host namespace from my linting rules. Otherwise, I get an error for my deploy if not exist policies. So that's why this bicep config file exists. Okay, that succeeded. Let me check. Let me check if my exemption is active. Okay, owner's been removed. Yes, so this will not give me a deny error, but because I've exempted that resource group. But let's see when I create another resource group without that tag. Sorry to keep you guys waiting. So what I did prior to this session kicking off is I created an exemption just to test it out. I created an exemption targeting that policy definition, and I set it to the scope of the resource group that I just removed the mandatory tag from. So that's why I didn't get an error. And here's the error that I was expecting, which is our custom deny message. So you can see this in CLI, and it's pretty much what I've set. Yep, it is what I set in the policy as code there. So that's the experience from CLI. Now I'll just comment out that resource group. I don't want that to slow us up. Let me show you snippets. This is quite cool. So let's say I knew nothing about Azure Policy as code. I wanted to get started with Bicep, just create some assignments. So what I might do is I might create a new assignments Bicep file, okay? Here. Now what you can do with snippets in Bicep, by the way, you need the Bicep extension for this. I have a nightly version, a nightly build version of the Bicep extension. So it's not the latest public release. It's a release after the latest release, because that's one of the releases that has these Bicep snippets in them for policies. So you can go and download this version yourself into your Visual Studio Code and get the same experience if you're watching this when there's no new public release that includes these snippets. So what you can do with snippets is you can go RES in your Bicep file, and these are all snippets that are available out of the box right now through the policy extension, the Bicep extension, sorry. And there's policy definition and policy assignment, exemption, remediation, and policy set definition snippets right here for you to select. So I'm going to select an assignment one. After I do that, you can see it's auto-populated the Bicep and JSON needed to do an assignment. So you can pretty much tab through these. You can change some of the values here. These are all coming through the snippets. So you can say do not enforce for the enforcement, change your source, set a policy definition ID for your policy set, or if you're referencing a single custom policy there, you can set a parameter, non-compliance message. So all that's out of the box available for an assignment. I'll just delete that and show you one of the more advanced ones, which is a policy definition with deploy effect. So if I select that, there is some errors here through the linting because I don't have target scope set to something like that. So I'll set it to subscription. So this entire snippet contains boilerplate code for a deploy if not exist effect. So you can use this to basically rapidly deploy your code if you don't have something like an example code to copy from, and change all these values, test it out. I hope it saves you a lot of time because I haven't really tested it yet because it's so new. So check that out if you can. Let me show you as well. We're running out of time, but I want to just show you the CI/CD workflows. So in my Bicep repo, that I've shown you previously. I've got some modules here for learning Bicep in different levels. So if you had no experience, you would start at level 1, progressing all the way to level 3. I do have a video on YouTube for this. If you want the link to that, let me know. And here I've got a YAML file containing deployment stages for the Bicep code. So I want to walk you through this. I think it's useful. So it runs on push to main, and it's only looking for changes in Bicep files. That's what this path statement here is there. And this workflow dispatch is actually allowing me to manually kick off this job from GitHub Actions. So this is if you didn't know, this is a GitHub Actions YAML file. It's not for Azure DevOps if you're using that, but there is something similar you can do with Azure DevOps YAML as well. So I've got 3 jobs here, 1 for each environment. Now I will expand this. It's going to get crazy, but bear with me. So this is running on just a public container, Ubuntu. We're logging in with our credentials. So these credentials are stored in my repository, maybe in the GitHub organization. These are SPN credentials for each environment. So that's what it needs to actually create the deployment. And here there's a single job to deploy Bicep, and there's also a sleep timer here, which waits 30 seconds. If there is a failure in the first deployment, it's going to then continue on with a retry here. Because I have found for some of the deployments I run through Bicep for Policy as code, there may be some dependent resources that are failing because they just haven't returned a successful response to the CLI in time. But if you retry that after like 30 seconds in another job, you'll get a successful deployment. So that's why this retry logic is here, and the sleep timer. Now you'll notice this deployment references one of the Bicep files, my main Bicep file in the folder. It's a subscription level deployment, and it references parameters JSON file in that folder as well. So I've got different parameters for each environment. So a parameter file for dev test. By the way, this is not the only way you can do this. This is just the way I've seen being done, and I've used it successfully. So I've got different values for different environments being passed in here as a parameters file. That's picked up by my YAML file there. So this pattern is pretty much repeated across every single job there. And the key thing here is that in this pattern, in this YAML, it depends on statements here, which is this needs parameter. So if there's a failure or non-successful deployment in dev test, it will not continue on to non-prod. So that's what this statement is about. And same for prod. Prod requires a successful job on non-prod there. So it's kind of like a progressive deployment through our environments. And that pretty much wraps up the demo. I hope it was useful for you. Let me come back to these slides. So we've covered some of these things here. Hopefully I didn't miss any of this, but if you want to check out that repo and go through some of the code yourself, you're welcome to. Okay, so let's wrap this up. 7 key takeaways I hope to give you tonight as you're watching this. Microsoft docs are very, very important. I've referenced them so many times in my policy work. They're an amazing resource, highly technical, and yeah, there's so much good stuff there. I mean, really high props to and kudos to the guys who look after that on the Microsoft side. Second thing is about the options that you have for reducing risk and for managing your policy assignments. So enforcement mode, not scopes and extensions. Look into it if you're not aware of it already. Consistent naming is a thing I think a lot of our developers strive towards, but it's hard to achieve. For me, I tend to prefer camel case, which is the lowercase first letter in my name of whatever it is, and then uppercase for every word in that string. You may use underscores, or you may use dashes, but whatever you use, try and be consistent across your code. It helps for readability. Look for code reusability. I think this is a very important thing, but something you may not gain benefit from for just starting out your policy as code journey. As your code grows in size and scale, I think this reusability goal is something that will definitely pay dividends for you. Modules are great to use as well. Splitting up your resource types into different modules helps for reusability and usage for other developers. Consolidation of common policies into initiatives and policy sets. This is about reducing the number of policy assignments you have in your environment, just making it easier to manage compliance. Yeah, definitely look into that if you're not using that already. And the last but not least is about your CI/CD workflow. So having depends on variables and arguments in your stage deployments to different environments, or having maybe a dedicated policy development environment that you can then deploy to first before you deploy to prod. That's something I think is definitely useful to look into. Now, after this session, I hope you have some ideas about policy as code. You've seen some of the things that I've worked on. You're aware of some of the pitfalls. Now, it's really up to you what path you want to choose. Here's some ideas. In the top level here, you can see there's some snippets. You can use snippets. As I've shown you, you can look at enhancing your code with CI/CD. You can look at creating your first test and deploying and testing your first custom policy there as kind of like an early task. So these are kind of organized into different levels in terms of what you may be comfortable with. Certainly it's not prescriptive as to you must choose a certain path, but yeah, just throwing this out there as what you may look to do in your own time or as part of your own project. And that wraps it up. Thanks for coming tonight, and hopefully it's been a great session. I'm not sure if we've made it within the hour. I think we might have.
Good, thanks, Jess. It's less than an hour actually, but all good. Thanks for
awesome.
The content. Yeah, really helpful and great tips from the vault. So we got a couple of questions for you. So I'm not sure if you have access to the questions. You want to read them, or do you want me to read the questions and we can get back to them? Yep. The first
one.
You
want to read them out?
It's on the screen already.
Okay. Yeah. So does Azure Policy only apply to Azure native resources, or can it be used for other things? So yeah. So Azure Policy, of course, is applicable to Azure native resources. What I know is that if you're using Azure Arc for your environment, you can also leverage Azure Policy for those Azure Arc connected resources as well. I haven't actually looked into that myself too much. I really hope to get the opportunity to do that. If you're using Azure Arc, I'm really interested to hear if you can use Azure Policy for those, because I have read it is possible. Yeah.
Another usage of Azure Policy is if you have a workload inside the Kubernetes and AKS, so you can override and use the Azure policies for the Kubernetes policies rather than which can be applied to the network policies, pods, and everything. That's another usage of that one. Okay, cool. Thanks, Jess. Another one is this. Basically, they're seeking advice for. Sorry. Yeah. So if you have any patterns or best practices or any recommendations around grouping the policies into initiatives.
Yeah. So I do recommend that common groupings of policies would be something like if you are managing all your tags through one initiative, for example. So the way to think about it, I think, is your policy assignment will target will bring in an initiative and assign that to a certain scope. So that might be a subscription, might be a management group. You may want to have multiple initiatives and multiple assignments depending on your risk appetite in your environment. So just taking, for example, tags, normally I would have tag governance policies all in the same initiative. That may be 5 or 10 tag governance policies. I would then assign that tag governance initiative to the highest possible scope in my environment, be it management group or subscription. But if maybe another management group or subscription needed different tag policies and different values for those tag policies, I would probably create another initiative with different tag policies in that. So it really depends on what's the environment like, what's the risk appetite. Do you have different requirements for your policies, or are they all the same? If they are all the same, look to use a single initiative, for example, those tag policies. Oh, you're on mute, Sam.
Another one on the screen.
Yeah, Terraform or Bicep. Look, I started my journey on PowerShell. I then migrated because I ran into, I'm not a PowerShell guru. PowerShell is very imperative. You have to do a lot of the logic. Didn't have time for that or the experience. So I went to HashiCorp Terraform, found it brilliant, loved it. Now I'm also dabbling in Bicep. So for me, this is a question about what's your experience? Do you have experience in Terraform or Bicep already? What are your requirements in terms of supportability and resource usage? So maybe Terraform doesn't support the latest APIs available in Azure yet. Maybe that's not a problem for you. Bicep supports all the latest APIs out of the box right now, but it's not as mature as Terraform. So there are pros and cons. I've certainly tried to get into both of them so I can see what are the pros and cons. I think for most cases, either will work fine, and mostly whoever I've worked with to do policy as code, they don't really care about whether it's Terraform or Bicep. They just want the end result, right? Which is policy as code and managed at scale and something repeatable and automated.
Cool, awesome. All right, I don't seem to see any other question apart from many folks are impressed with your setup, and they're asking what's your setup, what's your make?
Yeah. Have I got the? All right, hang on a second. All right, so some advertising for Rode. You can thank me later, Rode. So this microphone I'm using is a Rode Podcaster. What is it? Rode Podcaster MK2, I believe. It's a broadcast quality microphone. I got it as part of my first YouTube stream. It was a toss-up between this microphone and a Yeti, and I actually got recommended it by an MVP that an Azure MVP that I used to work with. Reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you have any questions about streaming setup and stuff?" So that's a very helpful tip from a good friend there.
Cool. I think Simon is the winner here because he recognized what is it, what brand is, and yeah, good job, Simon. All right, folks. Thanks, Jess. Really appreciate the effort, and it's really grateful session with tips from the wild. And yeah, if there is any other questions from viewers or from the folks on this session, if no, we are good to wrap up tonight. All good?
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks again, Jess. Thanks, folks, for joining us. And yeah, again, I say possibly please promote our LinkedIn page. It's another extra additional channel to our Twitter, which is main one, and YouTube, which is a primary for our live broadcasting. And we try to get into the LinkedIn environment also and platform. And for the Azure passes, free pass also, if you need it or if you know someone who is passionate to get hands-on the Azure environment, please reach out and we definitely can facilitate that for you. For the next meetup, we have already lined up, which is great for the guys working on the data, as Azure Data Services. It's around the PureView, Azure PureView. So watch out for the announcement. It's going to come out soon in the next couple of days. And yep, thanks again. Have a good evening, or if you are joining from anywhere other than Australia, good day or good night. Thanks, folks.